Awesome. Hi, everybody. Just going to get myself set up, but I hope that you are all having a lovely start to your week. Yeah, I am doing this week's deep dive for you and next week's. So just a little bit of logistics. You'll have me actually 4 times this month, if you do like to take part in our deep dives as well. So you will have me today, for deep dive next week, deep dive. Both of those will be pre-recorded. So I'm going to upload this. You'll see on Friday, ready for that like 10-15 slot if you wanted to watch it at your usual time, or you can catch up whatever time you like. You've got your Wellbeing Wednesday with me next week as well, which I will be leading live in the Zoom. And hopefully you can join us in that. Don't worry if not. And then I will also do the mastermind live in live time on Zoom. So 2 pre-recorded and 2 in live time. And you've got me while Bon is having a dreamy experience. I can't wait to soak up all of the knowledge that she's going to get from that amazing conference with some of the greatest authors and speakers and I want to say like thought leaders on the planet. I'm a little bit jealous. Well, we're here in like the very autumnal seasons of the UK, or if you're other places around the world that are warmer, enjoy that because we're really starting to feel that little autumn vibes where we are, which I love it. I love it actually. I love the change of seasons. But I am such like a lover of the seaside and being able to get the paddleboard out and things. Anyways, that's just a side note. So yeah, good morning if you're watching this at that 10-15 slot. And hello to anybody watching it, whatever time that is. Today's focus is unlocking effective communication. And we are going to talk a little bit about mastering conversations in the face of like our triggers and anxieties. And I think it's a really, really powerful piece. I don't know about you. I don't know if anybody else has had that experience. Have you ever left a conversation and thought, I really did not feel myself. I don't know what I said there. There was this like awkwardness, that kind of feeling. I still have moments like that. You know, you're a human, or there are certain people. I don't really know why sometimes, or maybe there's like an association there, but there's a trigger for my own insecurities, discomforts. But those conversations, it's really important still to have. So today we're going to talk about the neuroscience of communication, which I think is really cool. I love learning about the brain, and Bon and I are always saying that like we are trying to bring you like the forefront of learning because we are, I want to say we're kind of like in an era of like where every day there's like new feedback, new learning about our brains, about the way we think, about the way we learn, about the way we be, you know, about the way that we can tackle difficult things, that we can strengthen our minds and strengthen our mindsets and find resilience. It's like a whole different language that we're speaking now compared to even like 10 years ago. And I remember, you know, just finding this language allows us to even like find ourselves a little bit, doesn't it? So soak it up. Any questions that you have, feel free. You can either message at the bottom of my post of this video and just say, hey, Megs, I've got a few questions. You can write them there if you don't mind on the scene, or you can kind of reach out and DM me if you wanted to ask anything. Absolutely fine. So enjoy. So I guess it's kind of where I started. Have you found yourself in a conversation wanting to say the right thing, but instead you kind of freeze, say something that doesn't really come out right, or worse, you kind of say nothing at all? This is such common experience, and especially when we're triggered or we're working from a place of anxiety. Yeah, something I personally know a lot about. So today we're going to kind of have the objective of like exploring why communication becomes so challenging during these moments. We're going to look at understanding the science of communication, combined with some lovely techniques from NLP. And that's neurological linguistic programming. And this can help us navigate these situations more effectively. My life coaching background is in NLP, and I've always found it some like really powerful in some of the techniques that they offer. So let's start though with, what the science of communication and our trauma responses. We're going to look at the neuroscience of communication. So our brains are inherently social organs. As a human being, it's designed to thrive on the interaction of others. We need other human beings as a species in order to feel, experience life to its fullest. So that means the number one thing we need in life is good communication. It's not just about exchanging words. It's a complex process involving multiple brain regions to work together to process, interpret, and respond to information. Our prefrontal cortex, the executor center, it's the executive. So that prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain in particular, we're going to look at that. It's located in the front of the brain. It's the hub for high-level functions such as decision-making, reasoning, empathy, and emotional regulation. So when we engage in a conversation, the prefrontal cortex helps us to think before we speak. Really powerful part of the brain. It chooses our words carefully and considers the impact of our words on others. It deeply enables us to stay calm, listen actively, and respond thoughtfully. So that prefrontal cortex, if working, if we're able to really tap into that in our conversation, that should be that space in the brain that helps us to make that conversation flow a little bit easier. And we do have that empathy. So the role in empathy here, that real feelings part and perspective taking, this is the part of the brain also allows us to put ourselves in other people's shoes, right? That's empathy, a process known as perspective taking. So you can listen to what someone's saying and sort of kind of feel it, see if you can kind of get into that space because you're really listening. And it helps us to understand not just what the other person's saying, but also the emotions, the intentions behind their words. And this capacity for empathy is crucial in building and maintaining our relationships, which we all know. So the prefrontal cortex having all of those things is pretty cool because it means as a human being, we have a part of our brain set up so that we can be like really great communicators, really great listeners, really supportive friends and family. That is part of us as humans, part of our brain, part of our makeup. We also have this other part of the brain, which I'm sure Bon has spoke about. I wish I had a brain. I think that's what I need to buy. Bon has this great brain, doesn't she? That she gets out in some of her talks. I have to ask her where she got it because I think that would be super cool to have with me. But we have another part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala for me is like always comes up right from like years and years ago from researching, why, what is happening. The amygdala is such a big player. I would call it the brain's alarm system. So the amygdala and think alarm system. So despite having that beautiful prefrontal cortex, allowing us to kind of listen, engage with empathy, we also have this like amygdala. And when we are triggered, whether by a specific word, which we can be, a tone, or a situation, right? You know what it's like. You just feel an energy or a look or something that might trigger a past feeling of insecurity, or you just not feeling comfortable. And then all of a sudden we've got this anxious experience maybe or feeling. The amygdala, a small kind of almond-shaped structure deep within the brain, can hijack the whole process. And the amygdala is responsible for detecting threats, initiating the body's fight, flight, or freeze, which we talk about all the time. And this system is essentially our survival, our amygdala, our survival. But it also can interfere with our ability to communicate effectively. And that's because sometimes in 2024, in this part of our world, or whenever you are watching this, we are humans and we are triggered based on our past, right? Our past traumas, our past experiences. Personally, not to share too much of my personal story, but I definitely really feel like I guess it's on a smaller level, but I remember struggling with girls when I was like in school. I remember kind of like having a mean girl mentality group around us. And so for a while in my life, I was very triggered and like skeptical of like female relationships and female friendships. It's all definitely grown and changed in my adult life. But I had this like very high level alarm when I'd make friends. I'd be like looking, thinking like, are you a mean girl? Or they make a comment, I'd be like, that's mean to that person. That's not my kind of vibe. Like, it's just interesting. But over time, like I've grown and developed and changed. But it's very interesting, like where we might have a trigger from like a past experience, right? Which is normal. Why maybe that kind of shy, that freeze, that quiet side of us could come out. So remember, number one, I say it in every single talk, every session that I do with anybody. I think every coaching, you have to remember in all of this experience, like you are human, and like just be easy on yourself. It's the learning, it's the finding language to explore what you're feeling that helps us normalize it and helps us find ways through it. So remember that. So we have the amygdala hijack, which I really like. So during a trigger, the amygdala floods the brain with stress hormones like adrenaline. This is what happens, and cortisol. Cortisol is like a really big thing that we're talking about at the minute. And it prepares the body to react to danger. So I think it's crazy. And I said, I like this because it makes me feel like that makes sense. Why all of my prefrontal cortex kind of empathy maybe went out the window in that moment. I mean, I don't like the amygdala hijack, but I like this, like, this is what's happening. It makes things clearer. So the response diverts resources away from the prefrontal cortex. It's kind of going, you're getting flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, and it's kind of making all of that prefrontal cortex where you feel like you're calm and you're making sense and you're listening and you're empathetic. It kind of wipes it. It hijacks it. And it diverts the resources away from that part of the brain. And that leads to what often is referred to as this amygdala hijack. And it means that in this state, our capacity for rational thought, emotional regulation, and empathy is significantly reduced. So things like getting angry or in an argument, or feeling that sense of like, I don't even know what happened in that conversation, and having high emotion and all of it. An example is like, imagine you are in a heated argument with a loved one. And as your emotions escalate, your heart starts racing, your breathing starts becoming shallow, and your palms start to sweat. You might even feel like an urge to say something hurtful, which I'm assuming if we're human, we've all maybe had an experience similar. And this is your amygdala in action. You might maybe sit there and you can't think of anything at all. Maybe you're like, none of this makes sense to me. I don't know why I'm not making any sense right now. It just overwhelms your ability to be calm, productive, and actually maybe make sense or make comments that are deeply relevant, because we're unable to now listen, and we're unable to experience, that empathetic perspective taking side of us. So anyways, I just want you to kind of take it in and say like, all right, I'm human, and I think it's nice. So whenever I feel that moment of like, I'm not even like, I'm feeling emotion and I'm not calm and I'm not clear, I'm thinking, I've tapped into that amygdala. And all of a sudden my body and my brain's like, okay, how do you tap out of that amygdala? And I'll give you some lovely tips in a bit, but something simple. I start with a really slow, deep breath, because I'm starting just as fast as a trigger can hijack you that direction. A really deep breath can almost send you back into that calm nervous system. So we take a breath in, whatever that looks like for you, and then exhale slowly. Yeah, mouth open, mouth closed, whatever. Again, in and exhale. The trick is exhale slower than your inhalation. If you can drag yourself out of that like amygdala hijack, or once you've slowly coming out of it, that breath will help you kind of come back down to earth. It starts to calm the whole nervous system. And this helps you start to kind of tap back a little bit into that prefrontal cortex. All right. The impact of the amygdala hijack on communication, I think it's, quite obvious, but obviously we have impaired decision making. So the reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex means that our decisions are compromised. And instead of thinking through consequences for our words, we might blurt out something impulsive or react defensively. I definitely have done this, especially with my husband in times. Owed an apology, didn't know why I said it, didn't know where it came from, was very cutting, and thought, oh my gosh, where's that come from? Had to kind of go back and thought, like, I really lost myself there. I was really like tapped into that amygdala, and remember, like, it's okay, you're allowed to feel these emotions. And if you do, kind of lose that ability, that prefrontal cortex ability to communicate, just go back on it. Okay, like we said earlier, it reduces your empathy, right? So we can't put ourselves in other shoes. All of a sudden, everything's misunderstandings. We can't understand their side of it, and it just becomes like a big conflict. And then obviously being in fight, flight, or freeze response, like we spoke about, depending on the person and the situation, the amygdala's activation can result in the fight, where we become argumentative, defensive. See this a lot with like young people or, teenagers. Not always, but they're, that real angry aggressiveness to protect yourself, and others sometimes can like be really easily triggered. Flight is when you withdraw. I'm a real withdrawer. Sometimes you withdraw with conversation, then you start to maybe further withdraw with that interactive in like the hopes of, escaping the discomfort. That's really normal as well. And the freezes, you might just find yourself unable to speak. Our minds just go blank and we just can't process the situation. And so that's normal. It just means that you're in the amygdala hijack and we need to kind of come out of it. The impact on the next bit we want to look at, so we're going to look a little bit more at, sorry, I just want to kind of articulate that there's ways to get out of that amygdala hijack, and I want you to find ways through it. And if you do it, just own it. Just say, look, I've lost myself a little bit here. I went blank, let's start again and maybe try from a calm place. That's what you're looking for. Calm might be as well, like taking a walk, getting some fresh air. Maybe when you feel triggered like that, you need to say to the person, like, I need to step away from this conversation because I know that I'm triggered right now. And let's come back to it from a calm space. Or you could also maybe use that language with someone else, being very open and honest and kind of setting a little bit of a boundary there. You could very openly say, listen, we are both triggered. We are both working from the amygdala. I mean, that's hard to come from a calm place when you are in that amygdala hijack. But when you get to a place where you realize, like, I don't know what I'm doing right now, if you can pull it back and just, like, I'm not saying freeze and flight as in run away from it all, but maybe say, can we come back to this from a better place? Let's come back to this, walk away, get some fresh air, get yourself moving, get yourself out for a walk, go do some movement, go to the gym. I don't know if that's your thing, whatever. Nature, the simple things, right? Take a step back, calm the body, and then come back to those conversations if possible. All right. The next little section is to look a little bit more specifically at trauma because, trauma does impact on our ability to communicate sometimes. So the impact of trauma on communication is the next little bit we want to explore. Trauma, whether from a single event or prolonged exposure to stress, can fundamentally alter how the brain functions. And particularly in social and communicative contexts, which makes sense, doesn't it? Trauma survivors often experiences changes in how their brain processes information, particularly when faced with stress and any reminders of their trauma. So let's talk a little bit about like hypervigilance and communication. So if you are somebody based on trauma, you feel constantly on guard. That's something that is like a result of some of our trauma. So trauma can leave individuals in a state of hypervigilance where they are constantly on alert for potential threats. This heightened state of awareness, while protective in dangerous solutions, can be detrimental in everyday social interactions. So hypervigilant individuals may misinterpret neutral or ambiguous cues, as threatening, leading to defensive or avoidant behaviors in conversations. And that's, that's normal to feel that. If you feel on guard, if you feel like you need to protect yourself all the time, if you're working from fight, flight, freeze all the time, hypervigilance is potentially something that is experienced or something that's there. So an example is someone who's experienced trauma may hear a neutral comment and perceive it as criticism or hostility. And they might also respond with defensiveness or retreat from the conversation, even though no harm was actually intended. I don't know. My personal experience is that the brain for a human being, if we gave you like 100 compliments and we gave you one piece of feedback, that might be like to improve, 99.9% of the time, the human brain's just going to like fester on that feedback. And that is somebody just being human without the experience of trauma. So if you are somebody that does fixate on something small, a comment, I definitely have had moments in areas of my life where I feel like a little bit more insecure, where somebody might have made a comment and I've very much like made it a thing. If I unraveled it or unpacked it, it wasn't actually maybe made in malice or, there like we said, no harm intended. So sometimes looking at something and saying, where was that? What kind of place did that come from? So also anybody kind of experienced trauma, another kind of, I want to say maybe like side effect or like impact on communication is probably better, would maybe sometimes be like there's defensiveness. So we call it defensive communication. So often trauma survivors may also develop a habit of defensive communication. This can be manifest as being overly critical, argumentative, sensitive to feedback. The underlying fear is often related to being hurt or misunderstood. So they might react quickly and harshly to protect themselves and perceive threats. None of these things are, if the person who's experienced trauma is reacting in this way, if you are like that or I'm like that, remember, like, these things are coming from a place of protection, and we just need to notice it, point it out, and maybe see if we can come back at things in a different route. It's learning a little bit about ourselves and maybe about others, and being a little bit softer, a little bit more empathetic, thinking like that person's clearly tapping into that amygdala. Like, let's try and calm them. Let's walk away. Let's give them some space. Let's say, come back to it. You can use all of this stuff, especially from today's deep dive, not only to reflect on our own, but also to recognize in others, so that it improves our communication and our understanding and empathy of other people. And maybe you might not know everyone's story. There might be a lot there to unpack, or for you to feel a little bit more care and compassion for somebody who might be coming across a little bit more harsh than or critical than you think. So yeah, I suppose like an example of somebody with defensive communication, I've definitely heard this before. Like, say you're in a conversation, it might be like work. The immediate response sometimes can be, well, you never supported me without anyway. Whereas that might not be at all the case. Like, rather than just like addressing the topic, it's kind of this defense mechanism, designed to shift that blame game and then maybe coming back. It shifts the focus away from being vulnerable. Vulnerable is very uncomfortable, isn't it? Especially when, it's a trigger. Another thing, definitely, my biggest one in my journey personally is that many trauma survivors might have apologetic communication. I remember moving to the UK, it's probably like 18 years ago, and everyone was like, can you just stop saying sorry for everything? Stop apologizing for everything. And I was like, didn't even know that I did that. And as I started to listen to myself, I realized I genuinely used to apologize for sneezing. Like, so, I mean, who apologizes for sneezing? Oh, sorry if I was too loud, like apologizing. So, before understanding maybe where that's come from, the opposite end of that spectrum of being defensive, some trauma survivors might withdraw maybe from social interaction, not want to take part, or become overly apologetic. And these individuals, sorry, might struggle to assert themselves or express their needs and opinions, fearing rejection or conflict. And a trauma survivor might avoid eye contact, speak in a quiet or hesitant voice, frequently apologize, even when they have done absolutely nothing wrong. And this behavior stems from a deep-seated fear of confrontation or being judged. Normal. I'm telling you, it's normal. We're highlighting this so that you know that you are normal if you fit into any of these categories, or if you recognize it in others. It might allow us to just feel a little softer for them, right? Sometimes there's communication shutdowns as well. Communication is very complex. So in some cases, trauma can lead to the complete communication shutdowns. When triggered, a person might find it impossible to speak, actually, think clearly, engage in conversation at all. And this can be particularly frustrating for both the individual and those around them, as it prevents that meaningful dialogue and that resolution. So example, like during a difficult conversation, a person with a history of trauma might suddenly just stop talking, unable to articulate their thoughts or feelings. And this isn't a refusal to engage at all, but rather a manifestation of the brain's protective response to overwhelming stress. So it's normal. And I think I can speak and say that I can own my experience of probably all of those, in particular, the last one. So it's all good. It's just nice to kind of have words and phrases, theory to understand ourselves better in the world and the people around us. So communication feels great, feels comfortable, feels normal if we don't always get it right. Remember that too. There's you don't have to be perfect. You just gotta roll with it and just keep facing the uncomfortable things so that we can grow. All right. The role of triggers in communication breakdown. So let's have a little look at some of that stuff. We are going to look at, let's look at that roles. Let's have a little minute here. Perfect. So just kind of identifying triggers. So that's a good one. If we can pick out our triggers, maybe we can do something about it. So first, triggers are specific stimuli, whether it's like a sensory thing, emotional or situational. It's something that reminds the brain of past trauma and prompts that same defensive or avoidant response that we were talking about, from the original trauma. So identifying these triggers is crucial. So this is how we work through it. It's a crucial step in understanding why communication breakdowns happen. Why does that relationship or why did that conversation not go very well? So example kind of we spoke about earlier is like a tone of voice. So depending on the experience and the trauma, a tone of voice could do it. It could make you feel like I need to just retract and go quiet. A particular phrase, even a setting like a crowded room, too many people, too much noise, it can serve as a trigger. So when triggered, the brain reacts as if the original trauma is happening kind of all over again, which many of us know, making effective communication nearly impossible. So the first thing is building awareness and resilience. Awareness. What we're doing here in every single session is creating awareness so that when things happen, you go, oh, that's a trigger. Rather than your brain spiraling into that space and becoming lost in that feeling and, our rumination, all of the stuff we kind of talk about in some of our other sessions, building awareness and resilience is something that we need. So awareness is awareness of one's triggers and the ways in which they impact on communication is our first step towards breaking that cycle. So techniques such as mindfulness, we talk about mindfulness a lot. Mindfulness means like trying to be like fully present. Sometimes you can do simple like the 5 senses if you're feeling a little bit out of whack. What can I see? What can I touch? What can I smell? Go through each of the senses and just name it. Deep breaths, remembering like I'm safe. I always find like a really good feature is like I look around my room and I think about what I'm very lucky to have. So even in my room right now, I'm sat at home and I'm looking, thinking like I have like a safe home. I have a roof over my head. I have a table to eat at. I have a cup of tea in front of me. Like I am probably, more supported than many other people around the world. Like I need to find gratitude in these small things. And all of a sudden it brings me down. It allows me to feel safe. And I can recognize that actually I'm just about to have a conversation. And if I can stay calm here, I might be able to work through. I'm recognizing it, recognizing that's a trigger, finding some sort of movement. Grounding exercise is what is one of those things. Grounding is that idea, even, finding that present moment, looking around and being like, okay, what can I smell? Like all of that stuff is really helpful. In terms of building awareness and resilience, it says, recognize that when you've been triggered, take steps to regain that control. So I find it easy just to like name it. So naming what's going on and talking about it in some of this language. I want you to imagine like you're going to kind of like just put in a sentence what's happening to you, what you're feeling. That changes the game because it allows you to disassociate from it a little bit, to detach. So I might be driving and somebody's, maybe cut me up or almost hit me. And maybe I'm somebody whose amygdala's being, reactive and I want to shout and roll my window down and whatever. I don't know. That's not really my thing, but it's definitely my husband. So it's a good example. But if you can in that moment just be like, whoa, that person's just really triggered my amygdala. Like I'm losing my sense of like making, the right decision here. I need to remember that I'm safe. He's safe. He made a silly decision. Maybe he's tired. Nobody's hurt. Deep breath, move on. Like, is it worth the anger and the rage? And I guess like it's kind of just naming it, being like, whoa, I just had a really like amygdala hijack there, or going in and finding yourself apologizing over and over and over, and then realizing actually that's like a little bit of a trauma trigger for me. Like, I wonder why I was like that, maybe thinking about it later. You don't have to overanalyze it, but just naming it, being like, really notice that in myself. I wonder what that trigger was. And then next time you might recognize it, and it helps to build resilience. It allows you to bounce back, it allows you to kind of find ways to move through it. And I really like that. I love the power of language, the power of knowledge, the power of these lovely theories helps us to move, helps us to grow, because we can make sense of ourselves now and we can actually talk to ourselves in a way that allows us to move forward. So amazing. So I guess in summary, I want you to kind of understanding the neuroscience that we just kind of like dipped a toe in, behind communication and how trauma influences. That is crucial because it is important for improving how we interact with others, particularly when we're in high stress situations. And, simply put, by recognizing the brain's natural responses to triggers, remember, natural responses, you are human, you are normal, and developing a few strategies to counteract these reactions, we can all improve our communication skills. And this essentially what we need is to just feel healthier in our relationships. And it allows us to have more constructive interactions, even if this is somebody at work that triggers you, or this is somebody in your life that you can't necessarily not have anymore, but it allows you to find a way maybe through those conversations if you need to have them. So yeah, cheers and have a quick drink. Amazing. So I have a little journaling task for you. If you wanted, it's kind of something to take you. It's a mindfulness task, I suppose. What I want you to think about is, from our chat, from that section of our deep dive today, was there anything at all that you could see yourself in? Like, is there something you could name? Is there a conversation that you've maybe had with somebody? It could be you or someone else that you could say, like, that's somebody in fight, flight, or freeze. That's somebody who has had an amygdala hijack in our conversation, whether it was you or somebody else. And see if you can just name it, and say that, just notice it. Maybe you can like write down what happened in the words and the language that we use today. So by saying like, I don't know, today, my husband, he had an amygdala hijack and lost sense of his prefrontal cortex in his road rage. I can relate to that sometimes as well, but I do it in this way. It's just something like one little bit of a writing task, maybe using this language to explain a time, either now or maybe if you feel that experience in another conversation or in your life, you can make sense a little bit of these things. So even though my example of my husband in the car is not, it's not communication as in, you know, it is in the sense that if he's shouting out the window at another guy, and, you know, I've heard of many people, like, I'm sure you've seen in the street, sometimes people getting out and like going for a fight over something silly, like stealing a space and whatever. So that is not healthy communication, isn't it, in that situation? But is it worth it over a car park space or whatever? I think there's so many things to ask ourselves. Just, can we find that prefrontal cortex again? So yeah, that's what we're looking for. I think that's cool. And then just quickly, we've kind of touched upon these, so I'm gonna work through it really quickly. But I felt it was important to go back over a little bit of our stress response in the body, because sometimes it, you know, those triggers create that anxious feeling, and we have like a real, I want to say, I don't know about you, if you're noticing it, if you do follow any of the readings and the neuroscience, maybe you're just kind of picking it up from all of your lovely work with Bon. But there's a big talk about like adrenaline and cortisol, and what it is doing, you know, that's those stress hormones on our body. And I thought I'd just explain a little bit about adrenaline is often called the fight or flight hormone. So you must be bored of fight or flight, fight or flight. But you know, that's the big thing that we've learned about, that our body does that. That's our survival mode. And what adrenaline does when we're in that like that hormone's being produced, adrenaline prepares the body to respond to a threat. It increases your heart rate, it boosts that energy supply, and it heightens alertness. And while this can be kind of life-saving in actual danger, it can be totally, utterly detrimental during a social interaction. The heightened state of alertness can make you overly sensitive to what others are saying, causing us to perceive neutral comments as threats. So adrenaline, that is that hormone. Cortisol is known as your stress hormone, and it increases sugars in the bloodstream. It enhances the brain's use of glucose, and it curbs non-essential functions into a fight or flight situation. So, however, chronic exposure to cortisol, especially during repeated triggering, can actually impair your cognitive functions, such as memory, and concentration, which are crucial and effective for communication. Cortisol is often at the moment being studied in all like men and women, but they say that like imagine like as an example, like a mom, you know, not sleeping, you are mass producing the stress hormone if you have like children, triggering anything at all, because it's happening all day, all day, all day, all day, and all of a sudden you're just like mass producing cortisol, that stress hormone. And that's going to do so many different things to your body, especially if it's increasing sugar in the bloodstream. It's going to change like the shape of your body. It's going to change so much about your ability to respond in calmness. So it's very interesting to kind of explore just some of the hormones that are produced there. You know, and you know, narrowing your focus, having that brain fog, all of it is all part of it. So I think it's pretty interesting as we kind of move through. But yeah. Ah, deep breath. So there's just so much to learn, isn't there? And I think that it's super important to take it with a pinch of salt. And remember, you know, like I said earlier, that you are totally, utterly human. And like you've got this. So after looking over that stuff, the next section I want to look at is, you know, strategies. So we've looked a little bit at like the parts of the brain. We've looked at the triggers. We've talked about it in terms of like trauma. We've looked at a few little techniques to move through, a little writing tasks, just so we are using the language and allowing our you know, ourselves to accept like this is a human response. This is what I do. I'm learning this about myself. And now we're going to look a little bit about some of the NLP, those neurological linguistic processing techniques that can help us with more effective communication during those triggers. So one that I really like is reframing. Reframing is a really nice skill, something to think about, but reframing is a powerful NLP technique. And it involves changing the way you perceive a situation, which in turn changes your response to it. So instead of thinking, I always mess up in my conversations, you're going to change it and say, I'm learning to improve my communication skills. So it's about reframing it. So I want you to think of that sentence, write it down. I am learning to. I am learning to. And then that's how we finish how we're feeling. So reframing it is really powerful. You might say, I lost myself. I'm so embarrassed. I feel shame around it. No, I am learning to, effectively communicate despite having traumas. I'm learning to, work on my triggers and come into conversations in a calm space. I am learning to is so important in reframing things so that we let go of the vulnerability, the shame, the darkness, and that feeling of wanting to withdraw, to apologize. I think it's really powerful. So simple sentence. I'm learning to improve my communication skills. Today, maybe you might say, I've been learning a lot. Like if you ever need to rebuild a conversation and you've lost it, you might say, I've been learning a lot about myself and about that the brain, and there's this thing called an amygdala hijack, and that is what happened. And I'm really sorry. Like I really did lose myself, but I'm coming at you from a better place, from, my prefrontal cortex. And someone might look at you like, oh, but maybe you teaching them a little bit allows, again, your brain to kind of recognize, oh, a little bit quicker, like I can pop out of that, Um, Anchoring is cool. Anchoring involves, so this is another NLP technique. It involves associating a specific physical action or word with your desired emotional state. So you could develop an anchor by pressing your thumb and your forefinger together while thinking of time when you felt calm and in control. So you might think like, okay, I'm feeling a trigger. Maybe you have like, I'm going to do this. And that means like, I'm going to find a time when you feel calm. So let's think of a times when you feel calm. The first thing that I think of personally, it's my thing. If I press my fingers and thumbs and I'm looking for that memory, I'm thinking of the beach. And then all of a sudden I can come to a few little memories where I felt like that was the most beautiful view I've ever seen, or I can think of the people that I was with or who I was walking with, and that like the world around me. I want you to remember like that is a really good way. It's called anchoring. It's like bringing you back, but you have like a physical technique. So when you feel triggered, you're like, oh, I'm just going to press, sometimes you can just like have a fist, that sort of thing. Or sometimes, you can, I wouldn't call it a tick, but just take a deep breath. And then think, okay, what is that thing that can bring me back to a calm state when I feel triggered? Awesome. The next one is choosing active listening. So there is a choice sometimes in going, okay, I'm not 100% sure I agree with what that person's saying. This feels very triggering. I'm just going to stop and listen. I'm going to stop engaging for a moment and listen. So actively listening. So the importance of actively listening is when you might feel triggered, our focus shifts inwards. I don't know about you, but I can very much recognize that I'm thinking about the next thing I'm going to say, and the next thing I'm going to say, I'm not listening. That's what humans do. The other person's probably not listening to you either when you're both coming at it from a amygdala hijack. So active listening is a technique that forces us to kind of focus on the other person, which can help break that cycle of anxiety and poor communication. Listen to the other person. So one way you can do this is maybe you're focusing on something like if you are active listening and you don't want to kind of freeze and say nothing, just techniques here are paraphrasing what the other person says to confirm. Do you know what I hear? Something along the lines, maybe somebody said to you, I'm finding this really stressful. And you'd say, oh, I can hear you. I can hear that you're finding that stressful. Just paraphrase, say it again, recap what they just said. it makes them feel heard, and it allows you to be kind of focusing on being present in that conversation, but also not, I suppose, becoming super self-absorbed and losing yourself in. Asking open-ended questions help you in those conversations as well. So if you feel stuck, if you're in the freeze mode and you just go silent, just think, okay, I'm gonna have I can't speak. I have a technique here, and it is to actively listen. I'm gonna listen, I'm gonna repeat a few words, and then maybe just continue to engage or ask a question. So yeah, effective questioning, some easy ones if your questions are not always your, you don't know where to start, maybe just normal. It doesn't have to be a triggered conversation, just communicating with people that you don't know. It's that old feeling. I remember going to a conference and I went by myself, and I felt really uncomfortable, like just sitting in a chair and having to make small talk with people around me. Like even though as an adult, we just don't do it as much, where kids go into school and they're like, hey, I'm Molly, you know what I mean? And as adults, you kind of shy away from that. But kind of starting to learn to engage in that, or making small talk with people that are family, but you're often quite shy or quiet around because of your past experience. Maybe something small like, just, how are you? How's things today? That sort of thing. Um, but yeah, instead of asking maybe, are you okay, to somebody, you can say, oh, what's on your mind today? It helps the other person think a little bit deeper about how they feel. Or asking them in the situation, instead of getting fully like invested and emotionally, you can say, how do you feel about what happened? And that allows that person to be reflective. Yeah, being that kind of thing. When you said you were upset, did you mean because of what happened earlier or something else? That's a really good question, because that allows you to say, like, was it what just happened? Where has this come from? And it allows you to be actively listening. And I find active listening is the best way to, be an effective communicator, even if you are feeling like anxiety or triggers. It's just going, okay, I might be feeling a trigger, so I'm just going to actively listen and ask questions. You don't have to engage in any other way. So yeah, a nice kind of technique. And yeah, we talked a little bit about managing your own emotional state and like grounding techniques. Some other grounding techniques, not just like your senses, is sometimes like we did the deep breathing. Maybe you can count objects in the room. So it sounds silly, but you might look around and be like, okay, right now I can look around my table and be like, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 chairs, whatever. There's 8 chairs in my room. Sounds really crazy, but it brings you back to reality. And that is a grounding technique. And all of a sudden your brain is switched from like, I'm super angry with this person, to there's 8 chairs. And then I can come back to active listening. Or if you're just feeling anxiety, or I don't want to call it anxiety, or anxious feelings, if you feel in an anxious experience, or you're in that amygdala response, fight, flight, freeze. If you feel like you're withdrawing, you feel like you don't want to move forward in the conversation, all of it, whatever your emotional response is, whatever's holding you back from effective communication, you can tap out of your thinking in that grounding or counting, and a focus on being present. And yeah, there's also like this is kind of like, I suppose, a bit simple, but the pause and reflect response. It just means that, see if you can pause. Don't be afraid of a little bit of silence. I laugh because I think I can, like, the phrase in the UK is like, you can talk the hind legs off a donkey. I've always really laughed at a funny phrase, but I genuinely, sometimes silence feels uncomfortable, but it is important that if you are not ready to respond, or you need a minute, just stop, pull your thoughts together, and then respond whatever way feels good. Or you can say, just give me a minute just give me a second to process that. And you have every right in your life to take a breather, to create space for thinking. We don't have to fill that space all the time. We live in a society where information is thrown at us, in like little like smidgens of seconds. It's insane how much we're taking on. I picked up my phone, I've just kind of had it to the side for, keeping a little eye on time. But I was looking, thinking like the amount of information we must take in like 1 minute on a phone, and we're used to getting it instantly. You want to know what the weather is, click a button. You want to know this, here, here, here. So we're used to that, but that doesn't mean you have to, as a human being, act like a machine and give people what they need. And then all of a sudden you've got your ideas muddled and you're filling gaps and you're speaking fast. Stop, reflect, and respond, so that it comes from a place that you feel like you had control over what you were saying. Stop and reflect. It's a technique. And yeah, those are some really great ways to move forward. I want to just say that I hope that this session has allowed you to pick up a few little golden nuggets, understand a little bit more about effective communication, especially for those of you who have experienced, survived, trauma, understanding that, like, it is all okay. Yeah, and it's just time for you to recognize you're just being human, but we can work through these feelings in order to be effective communicators and build healthier, happier, safer experiences of communication. So yeah. In conclusion, the brain's response to triggers can make communication challenging. But understanding these responses gives us power to change the outcome. Understanding is amazing. Knowledge is power, isn't it? NLP techniques like reframing, anchoring, effective questioning, active listening can significantly improve communication, even when we're anxious or have anxious experiences or have triggers. And really small changes in how you approach a conversation can steer you in a new positive direction. It can reduce the impact of anxiety that you have and enhance your relationships overall. So hopefully you can take some of this on board. Maybe try it this week if you have an opportunity, and if this is something that speaks to you. Otherwise, share it, share the knowledge, share it with people who might be feeling this way, or it allows us also to be super empathetic, doesn't it? For those maybe coming from an amygdala hijack, think, come back to this when they're calm. And you can kind of recognize in that prefrontal cortex, come back to it from a different part of the brain. All right, join me in one really slow, deep breath. Inhale, exhale, let it go. That is your deep dive this Friday. I'll see you next Wednesday for our well-being session. Keep an eye on the Facebook page for updates, and I'll be here for your deep dive next week as well. It'll be pre-recorded, so I'll upload them ready for your Friday mornings. All right, peace and love. Take care, guys.